Hey guys, Thomas the Silver Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review the movie Moonfall. If you end up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord server, the second to my Patreon page, and the third to my PayPal page. Any donations are greatly appreciated and can make me review certain movies or perhaps play certain games, as I am officially being Patreon supported / PayPal supported as of today. But further support is always greatly appreciated and helps maintain the channel while helps supporting me simultaneously, and shilling will be reminded at the end of this review. So with that being said, let's get into the review of Moonfall. So for Moonfall, I had seen the trailers for this movie here and there, so I had a hint of what this type of movie was going to be, that being a hint. So I decided to check it out. And with that being said, let's get into the actual plot. As I will say, I will discuss it later, that this movie does struggle a lot, particularly in the third act, and it definitely hurts the rest of the movie, but we'll get there. Anyways, we started in 2011 with the mission of Apollo 11. Now, I'm not a history buff. I'm not sure if that's actually when Apollo 11 historically went into space. I'll say for the sake of believing in the movie, I'll say sure. For those of you who don't know, Apollo 11 is a famous, or infamous, depending on how you want to look at it, moon excavation that went very poorly, and there have been other movies made specifically about Apollo 11. In fact, there's just the movie called Apollo 11. Probably the most, I definitely recall that movie, but anyway. So we have a team of 3 individuals fixing this satellite. We have Joe, played by Halle Berry, Brian, played by some actor whose name I don't remember, and this other guy who gets swept up, named Marcus. This Marcus guy gets swept up by what I called in the beginning of my notes a black-like goop that comes from outer space, and Joe is left unconscious, while Brian is left to tend to making sure their ship doesn't go out of control. And after this mission is deployed, we cut back to seeing that their team was fired, or something went off while he was trying to explain his situation. We see his son very briefly, named Sonny, as a young kid, but then 10 years pass. So, you know, we're cutting to some time ahead. We then are introduced to our little janitor friend, whose name I kept calling him Arrow in my notes. I know that's not his name. And eventually I did get his name, so whoops. He's a slightly bigger character, who, as we see as the movie progresses, has these theories about what's going on with the moon, and we'll talk more about that as well. But for the time being, he goes to his second job, and he's trying to get in contact with NASA over the phone. So he's desperately trying to make contact as he learns a bit of information. So much so that he eventually makes his way to like this moon location, or like a place where you learn, like a museum for like moon stuff. I'm not sure how that's specified, but whatever. Point being that the kids kind of take him seriously as he starts discussing moon stuff, but then Brian was the actual guy that they contacted. He made his way there after avoiding collecting or getting debt and losing his house. So the two of them talk, and Brian, or Arrow, as I refer to him as, talks about how the moon is like this, I forget what he calls it, like this structure, manufactured structure thing, whatever. Anyway, when he returns home, Brian, his son is caught in a speeding act and is not in great shape. So we have a situation where Brian has another man with his wife named Tom, and thus we have a little bit of complications in the relationships and so on and so forth. As I referred to, Arrow talks with his old mom, who is very forgetful, presumably has Alzheimer's, so he has his own little grieving moments as well. But we see, after his little talk, that the moon's orbital shift, as it's being referred to as, or whatever he referred to it as, is now trending on Twitter somehow. But we learned pretty quickly that it was him after the fact. Anyway, so Tom calls Brian's, ex, or his current girlfriend, I'm not sure what their part of the relationship is. Point being that news shows people going out of control. So the Moon crew moves in as they are trying to essentially figure out what's going on with the moon. Meanwhile, Brian once again meets up with this Arrow guy, and he tries to get him to talk about how this black goop came into contact with their ship at the beginning of the movie, as we saw. But the situation gets worse as the waves of the water start to go crazy and swarm over the city. Of course, the moon, as some people already, historically have pointed out, that the moon helps with the tides or whatever, so, this is a more science fiction-y, like, oh, since the moon's doing crazy shit, the water's going crazy, and it's about to get crazier. But Brian is almost, that's his, no, that's the main guy's name. Brian helps Arrow out from drowning. Meanwhile, the boss at NASA steps down, giving Joe, aka Halle Berry, the keys to the secrets that they've been holding on to. Apparently, ever since even Apollo, this whole cover-up thing has been, implemented. So there is always some shady shit going on. And while that's going on, they learn of the other crew, Brian and Arrow, learn of the zoo thingamajig that was this, or she actually learns of the EMP thing with the zoo, whatever it's called. Anyway, Brian and Arrow are picked up by the military, who, she somehow knew their location, ? And the trio officially meets up. So they are shown how this armed device that they have set to go off to beat the black goop. Brian gets to see his son. His son was, acquitted out of prison, presumably, after his little hijinks. However, a quake occurs in the NASA station, so now earthquakes are happening. So they start to remove people out from the NASA area, and the two of them officially bring Arrow on board. This is when the water starts going nuts and turns into whirlwinds and things of that nature. So they get their gear, they say goodbye to their family. The family of each individual is like moving out together. So now we have our main team and split up the family group that is left here on Earth as we skip back and forth the two groups. Anyway, so they try to gauge while they're in the space the moon getting closer to them and how that's actually going to be to their advantage, since they would have to travel a significantly less amount of distance to actually get there. But however, while that's going on, we see that meteors have started crashing down into the Earth. So that's not good for the family group that has been sort of left there to deal with that. Anyway, Brian moves on with the smaller ship, and they get swarmed by the black goop. Or, they get to where it is at the very most. So they head deeper into the moon after they turn on the electronics, since, that's gonna help them. They, send off a thing that would help them. Meanwhile, the Earth team, as I'll refer to them for the rest of the review, drive off and get, snatched up by some car thieves. Apparently, as we cut back to the moon crew, the ship flies itself, which already starts some hell tilting from me as a person who's trying to, suspend disbelief, but that's already a flag that's started to enter into the movie. But we're going to get a lot more flags of troublesome material as we proceed into the third act, as I mentioned. So, the moon team gets scanned by some source while they're, running out of air because their ship crashed. Meanwhile, the Earth team avoids the car thieves. For a third time, they bump into these car thieves 3 times within this, within quick succession of each other. So these car thieves are consistently after them. Anyway, Arrow and Joe wake up, seeing that Brian is gone for some reason. But he wakes up elsewhere. He sees his son, and this is where everything falls apart. Apparently, this son explains what it is and where this black goop even came from. So, now we have to explain this. Apparently, according to this AI source, 1 billion years ago, or however many years ago, in a galaxy separate from ours, there was an advanced life of humans, yes, humans, who already lived in a world where there was no war. There was no war at all. Apparently there was peace on this planet, and the AI system that was there was helping them out for however many times or years or whatever. But for whatever reason, the AI rose up and killed those people, which already is a head scratcher. Why would the AI come to the conclusion that people are, inferior if there was no war? Again, the people built the AI to help them avoid the war, but the AI decided, oh, no, we're gonna be the ones to instill the first war. Again, that line of logic doesn't add up. And I did want to make a separate video about this, so I guess I'll touch on it a little bit here. Because I want to talk a little bit about world building, you see. I wanted to make a separate video explicitly about world building and how to effectively use it to help build your story and why it's actually fundamental to storytelling. However, there is, when you introduce world building and when you use it in, say, a science fiction story, I would say you should be a little bit more careful with your explanations. You can't just half-ass it and say, oh, there's peace, and then the AIs rose up, and that's the only thing you get. There was like 2 lines of dialogue to explain this entire situation, and again, those 2 things already conflict with each other, and that confliction, when it doesn't add up, it makes the disbelief, turn off, and now we're starting to ask questions about, like, well, okay, so why is the AI work that way? And, you start to look at the antagonist, the bad guy, the AI goop, and start to ask different questions about how it even functions and all that good stuff, because the start of the explanation was already built on a foundation that is fairly weak. And that's why, you have to really think about when you're writing, and I want to give some writing advice if you made it this far into the review. When you think about world building, and I'll talk about world building in a separate video maybe at some point, you should be, again, a little bit careful. You have to think, okay, so we want to build a story where this AI loses control. Why does the AI lose control? That is a question you should probably think about when answering, why this is happening in the first place. Again, in my video about how to become a better writer objectively, I talk about the main questions that you should start to ask yourself about, who, what, when, where, why, and how. And we're talking about the what. What happened that made this occur? Cause and effect. We're talking about fundamental stuff when it comes to storytelling here. And when you have this explanation and it doesn't fit, it starts to break apart, and once it starts to break apart, people might start to think about how, the other questions, when your objective should be, when you fulfill that answer, people aren't thinking about those questions. They're being entertained by the movie rather than being distracted by the various questions that are popping up in their head about how this even works and why the AI is even still doing this, and so on and so forth. And it gets worse and worse as you start to break apart these little, your little bridge of storytelling, the fundamental parts of storytelling, and world building is a part of that fundamental part of storytelling. One way you can achieve this, again, you should have spent more time, the writer should have, probably explaining this world, and calling it perfect probably wasn't the best idea, because it gives the implication that the AI just suddenly decided to abruptly, for no reason, think or assume that it was better than people. Again, that line doesn't fit. And what's odd is that I feel like whoever wrote this probably was too scared to be like, oh, but what about something like Terminator? Because Terminator is all about, like, this AI that is built from the future, and, it's built on a future that's really fucked up. So what if we decided to instead make the world perfect? I feel like that's a fear that the writers may have had, legitimately. I'm not really sure. I'm not going to explain that, say that that's the objective truth. That's my assumption. However, it does cause objective issues with the point, with the story. So, yes, you have to think about, what were these people doing? how did they build this stuff? How smart was the AI when they were building it? I mean, it doesn't even tell us that. It kind of just jumps and makes us have to assume that the AI has to have been smart. But then again, but they were perfect. You see, that line of the people being perfect and there being no war conflicts with that, because that, again, there's these two lines that are converging against each other. And that's something you want to avoid when you're writing something like this, is you want to make sure that your cause and effect, aren't breaking against each other. People were perfect. Therefore, the effect of people being perfect, the AI turned up against them. You see what I mean? It doesn't add up. So yes, this whole bit about what the AI is really does break apart this bad AI. And it goes on to talk about, after this poorly made explanation, how the planets, all of the planets, were armored up as these sort of vessels, and the only one that managed to survive this onslaught of AI sudden abrupt, attacking was the moon, which was sent, obviously, to us, Earth. And as they make their way out, the AI fixed their ship for them, so, it's able to do that. Okay. The good AI, I should mention, since there are two entities, there's the good AI and the bad AI. So, the ships from the good AI start blasting at the anti-bad goop AI, while Brian and Joe are discussing and arguing about who's gonna set off the final bomb charge that they have. The Arrow guy decides that he's going to be the one. He sort of sneaks off with the bomb, and he takes the sacrificial gambit of going in there. He blows up inside the ship. The two of them land back on Earth. We see the sun while he was trapped very briefly, and then the moon did a gravity thing that helped him get out of his situation, so he's fine. Tom is not fine. He sacrificed his life to save one of the younger daughters of their little family unit. So the moon team gets picked up. They reunite with their families. Meanwhile, back on the moon, apparently, which is even stranger since we saw him blow up, Arrow, the bigger guy, gets brought back on the moon, somehow alive. His consciousness, according to the good AI, was still alive after an explosion, and at its final gambit, it says, "We are gonna get ready for something," or "we should get started on something," and the movie ends on that note when he asks, "Well, what is it?" And that was Moonfall. And I will say that in terms of character, I would say that the characters were fine. They were, they had little bits of drama that helped carry them throughout their little adventures. That's all fine and good. The disasters that were occurring seemed to be in line with, where the moon was relative. So that's fine still, too. The ending, the third act, and the explanation about how this all even happened, that's where this movie completely falls apart. And unfortunately, it harms the rest of the movie by doing so. Again, this is why you need to be careful about, how to carefully craft your world building, and why it's actually so vital to have really effective world building, because otherwise you're going to come up with something like this, where you're starting to question the other things about, like, how does this bad AI work, how did it stay around, how did it form up, you know, all of these things. Since, you know, at the end of the movie, there was someone who was incorporated into the good AI. Could the explanation for the bad AI been, like, the person who was, you know, in main control of the bad AI was actually killed, and, you know, this whole peaceful thing actually was a falsehood, and maybe perhaps this guy, you know, when he died, he got inserted into the bad goop, and then the bad goop, you know, did the thing. See? That already kind of works a little bit better than just the AI suddenly bad, abruptly and from out of nowhere. That didn't really take a lot of exercise for me to come up with that explanation to you guys. And that was unscripted. This is all, you know, I have my notes here, but primarily that was very unscripted, so it didn't take a lot for me to get to a solution to that problem. And it's not the only solution. Again, if you had the people been in strife, you know, not, you know, in a perfect world, then sure, the AI rising up, and maybe the AI was abused to an extent. We don't know. There's no assumption that that's even the case. Again, because the explanation is so rushed, there's no time to even sort of absorb that information properly. And again, there are just other ways to get around it if that's the framework you want to use for your world building. You know, if I want to use this movie's framework, it's, you know, this whole other Earth, or, you know, people from another planet. There are definitely ways of going about doing that can fulfill the antagonist of the movie in a proper way, other than just saying, it happened, deal with it. Because that's lazy. It's lazy writing at the end of the day. It is. It's objectively lazy. You're not fulfilling any answers that are proposed. And that's not good when you're talking about world building. Again, I would like to talk about world building more in a separate video, but I have been really busy, so let me know in the comments if that's something you do want to see and hear about and have be talked about more in depth, and why world building is indeed crucial to storytelling. Let me know in the comments. As for a score of this movie, I do feel like that third act definitely hurts the movie significantly. And again, since everything is sort of on the par of just being pretty average up until that point, I'm probably gonna... The score that is probably most suitable to that is probably a 4 out of 10. Yes, even below a 5 out of 10. Because of how crucial that aspect of world building is to storytelling. So yeah, not a great movie. But if you did end up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord, second to my Patreon, third to my PayPal. Any donations are greatly appreciated and help support this channel, can make me play certain games, or perhaps even do specific movie reviews. And with that, until next time everyone, bye bye!